Hey, folks, welcome back. Welcome back. Hey, today I just want to touch base. I mean, maybe not dive so deep into the subject, but I wanted to touch base on navigation. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to use a compass or use your nav system in your phone. There's a plenty of videos out there to teach you that. I just want to kind of lay the foundation of navigating, regardless of where you're navigating to or from. We see a lot of examples, in the news that we watch. For instance, if people are leaving an area, whether it be from flooding or a war or some sort of event that has made people not want to be there anymore, I always get the impression that they have a direction that they're headed, but they're just going. Each person is just following the person in front of them, and it's like sheep. And for me, that's how I kind of see it. Is somebody started heading that direction, and slowly people started filing in behind them and following, and now you have this big huge group migrating, and half the time, they may know approximately where they're going, but it's highly doubtful that that was their actual plan, was to migrate together in a group of thousands. um, and it's just how it goes. It's how it works. I certainly wouldn't fault them for it, but I think in an emergency situation, where you have to navigate your way to a destination, I would think that it would be better to have some sort of plan, that you could follow, to where you're not just following the crowd, or a sheep moving in the herd. So, I want to touch a little bit about navigation. Now, the go-to navigation is our cell phone. You push a button on an app and you put in your location of where you want to go, and you hit start, and it tells you how to get there. It tells you when to turn left, when to turn right. It's pretty basic, simple, and a huge luxury that I think a lot of us, take for granted, because if you take this tool out of the equation, now you have to figure out another way. Um, and this tool also has its limitations. Obviously it's a cell phone. It, connects to cell towers, and we've all been in the situation where it wasn't connected. The system was down, or we were out of range, or whatever reason. And that has happened to me, both driving and, trail hiking, exploring, out, just being outside. You find areas where the coverage ain't so great. So, in order for me to compensate for that, because I use an app on my phone, for trail hiking, it's called All Trails. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's a pretty popular app. I've tried several other ones, but I think the ease of use of All Trails is just great. It does everything I need it to do. I do have the paid version, which allows me to download, the maps, so I can see them offline if I was to lose my cell phone signal, and it's not feeding me that live, location information for me to follow and find my way. The problem with that is, uh, when it does lose signal, it doesn't know exactly where I'm at. It just puts me on the map following a red line that it's designated a trail. Now, if I can see that trail, I'm walking on it, I can see it. There's blaze marks on the trees. It will follow that red line. And then once I get back to a cell phone signal, it'll kind of backfeed all the GPS information and show me if I missed a turn or something along those lines. So to compensate for that, I bought this. This is the Garmin Glow 2. This little gizmo, I believe, was designed specifically for small aircraft that don't have, high-tech electronics in them. It's designed to connect with a tablet or an iPad, and you can navigate from that. Now, I did have to do a few adjustments. It took a little bit of Google searching to get it to connect to the phone, correctly, and for it to feed its GPS information into the All Trails app, but I did get it to work. It's been a lifesaver. There's been times on trail where my phone service has dropped out. I'm not getting the Verizon tower. It's roaming. It can't find something, but I just turn this on and boom, it at least does that. Now this doesn't connect to the navigation in the phone or the internet or text messaging or anything like that. So, I think in that scenario, the Garmin InReach or any of the similar type items would probably be, a good choice. I don't have a Garmin InReach. I've been looking at buying one. This thus far has gotten me, what I needed to get done. It did the job for me. It did exactly what I needed it to do, but it's an extra piece of gear, that I carry in this little pouch. It clips on my belt when I'm hiking, and I can put the cell phone in here, and I believe I had the charging cable in here. No, I do not. But it just has a little mini charging port there, and I've never had it run out of battery. I've used it for days and days and days and days, and it just still keeps working. But I don't use it that often. When the phone gets the cell phone tower signal, it alerts me, and I can turn this off and go back to using the standard tracking in the phone for GPS. So this is a good thing. I don't know if the Garmin InReach will connect to your phone in the same manner for running, say the All Trails app or whatever app you're using for trail hiking or backpacking. That's I don't know if it does that or not, but it does have a screen on it that you can put maps in it and actually track it and track yourself from the Garmin InReach. And it also has that, emergency SOS button on the side that, alerts emergency services if there's an emergency. This, as long as there's a tower to connect to, I can alert 911, whether the phone's activated or not. It's one of the safety features they put in phones. But I don't know if it has no connection to a tower, will it still contact 911? I don't know. I've never tried. This does not do that. This, I cannot connect to emergency services with this. The only thing this does is provide GPS, satellite data, and location for this. That's all this does. And this wasn't hateful. I think this was about $70 or $80. I probably got it on sale. I've had it a few years. It works like a champ. It took a little bit to get it to communicate correctly with the phone, but once I got it, I put the phone in airplane mode to save the battery, and I can run this and the phone together, and the All Trails app works. Now, I can't load the pictures to the app. I can't read the comments on whatever trail I'm on, because this does not provide me with an internet signal. It's not a hotspot. A hotspot would probably be good in that scenario if that hotspot connects to satellites and not cell towers. So I don't know. I don't have a hotspot. It's probably not anything I would ever even consider, because there's so many options, and I'm not a big fan of just adding gizmos and gear. If I could combine these two, which I could with a Garmin InReach, because you could still text from that. You have to pay for that service. I think it's like $10 a month or something. To pay for the texting option to where you can text your loved ones or your spouse or your parents or whatever. So they can know where you're at and you're okay. Yada yada yada. But this setup does not do that. It's just GPS coordinates. So that has helped me out in the past, and I do normally take the phone when I'm in the backcountry, so I don't get lost. Now, the one thing I do before I go into the backcountry, and I've done this basically my entire life. I'm always one to explore. If I'm going on vacation, I don't just drive to the hotel or the Airbnb or whatever, and not try to see what's around me, what the road names are. Is there housing developments? Is there commercial areas, businesses, names of stores, churches with big steeple, anything that's a landmark. I kind of like to know my area. And of course, where I live, I know my area fairly well because I live here. But it surprises me how many people don't. Um, they live at a place, and 2 blocks away there's something that they don't even know is there, or 2 streets away is a road that they never heard of. And I always found that strange to not know your area. I know one of the things that me and a good friend of mine used to do when we had first turned 16, started driving, is we would just go drive around. We didn't have a destination. We just went and drove around and looked at, and we drove all over the place, hours and hours and hours and miles and miles and miles. Gas was pretty cheap back then, so you could do that. And we would pile in the car after school, and we would just go exploring, or Saturday just go drive around. And so I saw a lot of stuff. Surprisingly, a lot of it stuck with me memory wise, which when I do have conversations with people that they say, "Oh, oh, you're from this area. Have you ever eaten at this place, or have you ever visited this?" And they're like, "No, never heard of it. Never heard of it." I'm like, "Right, it's right there in the middle of town. It's been there forever. How can you not know that?" I don't even live there, and I know that. So it always just boggled my mind that not everyone does that. And I'll tell you a story. 22 years ago, 20 years ago, something like that. I was on vacation with my family. The kids were little. We took them down to the beach, to play in the sand, play in the ocean, walk the boardwalk, all that. Ocean City, Maryland. And one of the days that we were there, my family said, "Hey, is there anything you want to do?" And I was like, "Yeah, there actually is." And, "Well, what is it?" I was like, "There's this, thing I'd like to go check out. It's the very first point set on the Delaware-Maryland state line." And they're like, "What?" I was like, it's a property line between the state of Maryland and Delaware, and it's in the first time that they set a point on that line. This is that point. It's not far from here. I think it would be cool to go check out. They say, "All right." So we all piled in the car and we drove up there, and we walked around a little bit till we found it, and it was basically nothing but a 4-inch brass disc or a 3-inch brass disc and a sidewalk with some numbers stamped on it. That's all it was, and I was like, wow, this is so cool that, in the 1700s, someone set this. Now, I'm sure that disc has been reset. The sidewalk has been repoured, since then. But just the fact that, in the 1700s, I guess, I don't remember when that line was established between Maryland and Delaware, guys stood there and said, "Here's the spot." To me, that was cool, and I've always been that way. But, I remember my family looking at me and saying, "Is this it?" I'm like, "Yeah, this is it right here." "Is this it? Is that all there is?" I'm like, "Yeah, what'd you expect?" They're like, "There's no historical plaque or a gift shop." Or I'm like, "No, it's just a point and a sidewalk." To me, it was awesome, but to them, they weren't as thrilled as I was. So that's how I've always been. But, when it comes to navigation, I feel you should always know, where you are, what your location is, because if you have to move to a different location, it kind of helps to know how to get there. Lots of different ways. Like I said, the GPS, the navigation system, you type it in there, and the voice tells you where to go, turn left, turn right, which is great. But if you don't have that available, you have to resort to maps. And I pulled out a few, more than a few. I have multiple maps. I've been collecting them for years, of different areas, different states. Here's the Blue Ridge Parkway. Here's the Smoky Mountains. Here's Maryland, of course. Here's Pennsylvania. And it's basically, these are basically, some of these are just paper, like the regular paper maps. And some of these are the nicer ones that are laminated. Generally, the laminated ones you have to pay for. They're generally not free. But a lot of times at visitor centers or, gift shops or where other places have I gotten them? State park offices, stuff like that. A lot of times they're free, and I'm always the guy that looks at that big board full of pamphlets and maps and says, "Oh, here's a map. I could use that." And then, of course, I've had to buy them, and they're not hateful. They're $5 to $10 for a laminated map. They're not very big. Not like some of these maps where you unfold them and they're as big as the one behind me. Um, in addition to maps, I also pick up state park trail maps. And here is a few just from last year's hiking season that I pulled out that I just haven't filed away yet. These are New York State. I did some hiking and some camping up in the Finger Lakes, so I picked up. And these are generally put out by trail associations and Department of Natural Resources or state park administrations, and they're basically a map of the state park, the roads that are in the state park, the scenic locations, historical locations, and the trails. And these are great to have. I have them for tons of different areas. Basically everywhere that I go, I always pick up one of these. And I do know that if you call a specific state farm or any particular state farm or state park office, hours are usually kind of funky. It's not like it was, a long time ago where everybody worked 9 to 5. So it may take a little bit to get through. But if you call them and ask them for a state park map, 99 out of 100 times they have them. They'll mail them to you for free. If you don't want to wait till you get to the park to pick one up. So, and they come in, different, here's one. This is Rocky Gap State Park in Maryland. This is out in Western Maryland, and it's a couple different maps of the park and the campground, and then the lake trail area. And then, of course, it has, which is usually helpful, a couple of, some advertising advertisements in it for, local businesses. If you want to know where you can go out to dinner, if you're on vacation, these are extremely helpful. This one has like for a little grocery store, a liquor store. Here's a deli, and it varies as to what type of advertisements you'll find in this kind of stuff. But they are helpful. I mainly get them for the trail maps. So I use a paper map in conjunction with the All Trails app. So I'm guaranteed not to get lost. Which is always good. These are extremely helpful. Here's another example. This is the Mason-Dixon Trail, which I believe is about a little over 200 miles. It probably tells me on here how far the trail is. I don't see it. But this is a packet. I think I joined the Mason-Dixon Trail Administration or Trail Association or whatever, and I got these for free. Came with a little sticker, and these are basically, it's broke down into 10 different maps, because the trail's pretty big, and in order to show you any kind of detail of the trail itself, it would be a big map with a tiny little line, because it's a trail. So they break it down into sections and regions, and it's topographical. So, if you look at these, there's topography on there. It'll show you ridges and valleys and roads and the trail, which is extremely helpful to find your way. If you're researching or if you're planning, a trail hike, whether it be the Mason-Dixon Trail or the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, I would suggest getting a map packet, and you don't have to memorize it. It can add up in weight, and I know a lot of thru hikers don't like the weight. They're just going to rely on their phone. But I'm a firm believer of a paper map. I carry this in my truck because I'm around the Mason-Dixon Trail a lot, as well as this in my truck in my emergency bag. Now this is areas that I'm in regularly for the most part, and these are basically road maps. These are laminated road maps of Pennsylvania and Virginia, and here's Maryland. The one from Maryland, I believe, also shows portions of Delaware. So it pretty much covers the region that I'm in around my house. So if I was ever in a situation where I had to get back home, 9 times out of 10, my location is going to be in one of these maps, and I can use this to navigate my way home. I keep a write in the rain pad in here for making notes. I keep a piece of a ruler. This was a 1 foot metal ruler. I don't know where I got it, but I cut it off so it fits in the bag better, and I can use it in conjunction with my compass, with my base plate compass, and I can actually shoot an azimuth or shoot a bearing or establish a bearing or shoot an azimuth, so I don't have to follow a road or a trail. You know, if I'm going to cut across country, across a bunch of fields, let's say where I'm at, there's a bunch of farm fields between me and a river that I need to get to follow to another point, working my way towards home. I can use my compass and the map, and I can shoot an azimuth, and then I can use the compass to establish that azimuth in the real world, and I can walk that straight line to get me where I need to go, as opposed to taking the long way of walking the road. It's also possible that walking the road could be dangerous. So this it's just another level of assurance that you can get to where you're going. And this works. This method works on maps or on trail maps. Any of these things I could use. They all have north arrows and grid ticks on them. You can watch a video to learn how to use all that stuff, and it's not difficult. Once you learn how to do it and do it once, you'll be able to do it forever. It's not difficult at all. But I keep these in my vehicle. I keep an ink pen and a mechanical pencil, so I can write. I probably should put a Sharpie in here, or maybe a dry erase, because you can write on these laminated maps and then wipe it off. Never really thought about that, but I did see it in a video not long ago. There was a guy that kept a dry erase pen in with his maps and such, which I thought was smart. I don't keep that. I just use the pencil. I can make notes in the write in the rain pad, and that does what I needed to do. Now, if you're home and there's some sort of event that you need to flee from, whether it be a hurricane or a tornado or a fire or war, or anything in that, you can use these maps to say, hey, I can get to my brother's, or I can get to my friend's house. Where is it at? Let me look on the map, and I can get us right there. That's a great thing. I think that a lot of people should learn more about map reading. I know we've fallen into this, follow that GPS lady in the phone voice to get where we're going, and it blows my mind that people just don't have a clue. They just turn where it says to turn, go where it says to go, stop where it says to stop. And if you take this away from them, they could not find their way back to that location or from that location. And generally, I don't know about everybody, but I know generally with me, once I find my way to a place once, I can find my way there again without any of this. I commit it to memory. I remember, I went down here and I turned on this road, and then I went down here and I made a right on that road. And I may not be able to sit and write down all of the road names and the exact distances and all of the information that this gives you, but as I was driving down a road, I remembered, a fence with a church and a turn after it, and that'll trigger, I turned there, and that's kind of how I do it. And so having this resource available to you is great. One last thing is something larger, like a road atlas. I keep these. I have several of these style, around the house. If I need to look something up, a specific state or a road or something along those lines. This is a plethora of information. Certainly not as detailed as a trail map, or as a individual state map, but certainly enough for me to find my way if I have to travel a long distance You know, if I had to, I could rip the pages out and fold them up and take them with me, because this size book is not exactly portable. But say I'm planning a road trip, you know, for vacation. We're going to go camping. You know, like for instance, when I went to the Finger Lakes, you know, I didn't just type in the address of my campground. You know, I knew where the campground was on the map, you know, because I had ordered the campground map. And in addition to being able to, you know, call and get these, I don't know if I've ever seen a state park organization that didn't offer the maps free online. You can go to their website, you know, whatever the, you know, for instance, what do we got here? The East Hudson Highlands State Park, which covers you know, a couple of different areas, and this is the trail, you know, the trail map for that. But there's a website. The web address is probably on here somewhere. Info at NJTC.org. It'll give you a website that you can go to, and you can actually view the map and print it out. So you can have that, you know, this exact same pamphlet. You know, you can view this online and print it out if you don't want to order it in advance. Just so have it before you get there, and then you can use this in conjunction with this and say, oh, I need to take, you know, Route 6 up to Route 452 and turn on, you know, and that'll get you there without this. And that's the way it used to be done. I learned all this as a kid, you know, traveling with my grandparents and my parents. You know, I was always the kid in the back seat that got to play with the map, you know, because it was one of those things that was, you know, it kept me occupied during road trips. You know, my grandfather would hand me the map and say, you know, here you go, boy, you know, navigate for me. Okay, Pop, you know, where are we at? You know, and he'd show me on the map. All right, we're about right here, and here's where we want to go. All right, Pop, I got this. You know, you want to take, you know, Route 19 up to, all right, you tell me where to go. And he already knew where to go because he had already looked at the map in advance. He was just occupying me as a 6 or 8 year old, you know, gave me something to do. And of course, along the way, he would point out landmarks, and he'd say, oh, you see that big barn over there? Yeah, I see it, Pop. Is that barn on the map? No, it's not on the map, Pop. It just says, you know, such and such farm. Oh, well, that must be what that is. And he was just putting that in my head to remember that kind of stuff. You know, so when I took that trip again, you know, I would say, oh, Pop, look, there's such and such farm. Yep, sure is, bud. And that's just the way it was. You know, I had one of those strange childhoods. You know, I enjoyed it, and I got a lot from it. You know, so having this kind of stuff, I think is a necessity. You know, I think there's a lot of people out there that just rely on this way too much. And if you take this out of the equation, you know, you have to wonder where those people are going to be. And they're going to be lost, first of all. You know, but those of us, and I'm sure a lot of you, you know, that keep maps and trail guides, you know, and we know how to use a compass, and we know how to read a map and an atlas. That's great, you know, and I think, but, you know, I think everyone should, and it's the ones that do rely on this, you can't fault them for it, because this is where technology has taken us. And at some point, I'm sure all of this will be just completely obsolete. If it doesn't get saved, you know, eventually it's just going to be not available. You know, they just won't make paper maps anymore because this is reliable. But is it? I mean, this could stop working. You know, just like this could catch fire. You know, when you're sitting at your campfire trying to figure out where you are, you could catch your map on fire, and you're just as screwed as if, you know, the phone signal dropped out, or you dropped your phone in a river, or you dropped it along the road somewhere, and you know, any number of circumstances that could, you know, come back to bite you. This, I think, is the least likely, because, you know, this is pretty big. It's pretty hard to lose. It's not something that, you know, if you're heading towards a destination, you're not just going to be walking along staring at the map, because, you know, if you ever look at a map key, wherever the map key is on this map. There it is. If you ever look at the map key, the amount of miles per inch, it takes a long time to cover that much ground. So there's really no point in sitting there staring at the map. You look at the map, you see what direction you got to go in. You use your compass to establish that direction, and then you put all this away and you walk for a couple of hours until you see a landmark or some sort of change in geography to say, oh, is this the right place? Let me look at my map. You only have to do it a couple of times. If you're into backpacking and hiking and you use an app on your phone, that's great. I do as well. I use it primarily. I keep this stuff with me as a backup, redundancy. In case this should fail, I at least have something to fall back on to where I'm not just walking around in circles in the woods trying to figure out where to go or where I am. But in a non-emergency situation, if you just put this away and get one of these, find your way to where you're going and walk your entire trail, and then find your way back to where you started. You only have to do it one time, and that's it. It's good to practice it to keep your skills sharp, but it's not rocket science. Once you learn how to do it, it's pretty much stays with you. It's not difficult. I do practice it every now and again. Like I said, I take a lot of trips. This doesn't always work out for me because of GPS signals. Now, with these two working together, it's much more reliable. But there has been times where I've been in a thick patch of woods, down in a low valley where the canopy's thick, and I just can't get the GPS signals. If it doesn't have, I think, 5 satellites connected at one time, it doesn't give you such an accurate location. If you get down to only like 1 or 2 connections, then it alerts you and says, hey, we're not connected to many satellites. Your location, could be plus or minus 10 miles. I've only had it do that to me once. I don't remember where I was, but it literally dropped to like 2 satellite connections, and my location was bouncing around, because it couldn't quite decide where I was. Instead of trying to fight with it or guess, I put it away. I pulled out my map. I looked at where I was on this map and say, okay, this is the approximate area that it thinks I'm in. That's right here on the map. I need to go up this trail for another 1.5 miles, and I'm going to come to a split off to the right. I need to follow it to the left to get where I'm at. And that's usually enough to get me back to an area, or at least it did in that scenario. It got me back to an area where I was getting a decent, location on the phone, and I could verify that I was correct. But, I at least had this instead of just keep walking. If there would have been a fork in the road that I was unaware of, and the branch off was another mile away, but I didn't know about a fork in the trail before that turnoff that I knew I had to take, and I guessed 50-50 whether I was taking the right one, let's say, okay, well, it's probably to the right. Well, then I would have completely missed it. And by the time I got my signal back, I would have been way far away from where I needed to be and backtrack. And, when you're walking trails, you take the wrong trail, it doesn't take long to have to backtrack an hour or 1.5 hours. Which to me, that to me, I think is avoidable, if you're properly prepared. So, take it for what it is. It's just my advice. I would suggest there's plenty of videos, a couple of guys on YouTube that actually set with the compass and the map and the ruler, and they show you how to establish an azimuth so you know where to go, and they show you how to triangulate exactly where you are. There's a bunch of good videos on there, to learn that. But again, like I said, it's not rocket science. Once you do it once, you're fine. So that's about all I got for that for navigation for you today. I hope this helps, just a little bit of advice, or at least an example of my redundancy and my backups, and how I kind of prepare myself for any emergency that may land in my lap. So in the meantime, keep your head on a swivel, and we'll see you in the next one.